Hello and welcome to the KE Report. I'm your host, Shad Markwitz, and we're getting an update today from Stillwater Critical Minerals. It's traded on the TSX.V under the ticker PGE and on the OTCQB under the ticker PGEZF. We're speaking today with President and CEO of Stillwater Critical Minerals, Mike Rowley. And Mike, it's always great getting you on the show for an update. And for us, it's not been very long since we just talked face to face. I just saw you at the Energy Transition Conference in Washington, D.C., with a whole cadre of other investors. And so I'd love to get your takeaways from that event as far as the kind of points you were making to investors about the project. And also, while you were in DC, you had some time to meet with different political bodies from Montana that are interested in critical minerals. So what were your key takeaways from that energy transition event just last week?
Thanks, Chad. It was very good to see you in person, as you note. It was a good show. It was a productive show. The meetings were excellent and the one-on-ones as usual. But as you note, it was being in D.C. that really drove it home. We had some fantastic meetings around the show, outside the show, including senior politicians from Montana that drove home for us how aggressive the U.S. is on securing domestic supply chains for exactly what we have, especially nickel, cobalt. And as a reminder there that we're the biggest nickel resource in an active U.S. mining district, full stop. And the work that they will do to move this along. Those are very positive discussions for us.
Well, and let's talk about the project, Mike, because as we were at the conference, I mentioned to a couple folks that they should go check out Stillwater Critical Minerals, and a lot of them were still confused as to what kind of project you even had. So over breakfast or lunch sometimes I would mention the project. Some people thought it was just a low-grade bulk tonnage nickel project. Other people just thought, oh, that's just a platinum and palladium project next to Sibanye, right? And they're missing the meat and potatoes here, that it's a polymetallic deposit, and it's not just nickel, and it's not just bulk tonnage nickel, it's also high-grade nickel, but there's also copper and cobalt, there's gold, there's rhodium that has a nice credit along with the platinum and palladium. It's really a nickel-forward deposit, but maybe you could speak to people listening, Mike, about how should people think about the overall project and the 5 deposit areas that you have at Stillwater?
Yeah, that's actually a really good summary. I notice in my conversations with investors and with the public, some people think that we're Sibanye Mark II, which is incorrect. We're a very different mine model. We bring a lot more battery metals and we bring economies of scale, size. And then, as you note, some people think we're a big low-grade nickel project, which is also not true. We have marvelous optionality on mine method. We have high grade within mid grade within that bulk tonnage component. And I think that gets lost as well. Broadly, we're trading in line with the indices and with our peers. It's not a good time to be a nickel palladium junior, and those are the 2 biggest components of our resources, 48% and 20%, I think, by value. We also have 500 million pounds of copper, though, and that gets lost, as you mentioned, cobalt, rhodium, platinum, all the other good stuff. The key point is that this is a big and well-mineralized district that the U.S. government has actually subsidized historically for critical mineral production. I'm thinking of chromium in the war years specifically, but, it was producing high-grade copper and nickel in the late 1800s. And then you fast forward to the current operations of my neighbor, which have been expanding since 1986. And you've got a really rare setup with the very large resource that wants to get bigger in an active U.S. district. I don't think the market truly gets that. The U.S. government certainly does. The end users of metals certainly do. We've talked with a number of them now. So how to get the retail market to register it? And it's a famously difficult time right now to be a junior explorer. Peter Grandich said it's the most vicious bear market in 40 years. That just speaks to the opportunity that's here in a number of these quality stocks. And I would say especially ones like this that are in an active jurisdiction with a major on board.
Well, let's talk about that, Mike, because the reason that Glencore came into the mix, from what I understand in our discussions, is that they like the polymetallic nature. That's really Glencore's bread and butter, is to deal with multiple metals. There's a lot of credits that you get by having all those metals in the mix, and they're not throwaway metals like you see in a lot of other projects. All of these, the copper and the platinum and palladium and the nickel, all tie together. The cobalt, it's a significant amount of cobalt. That was a flavor of the day a couple of years ago, but it's still there. You got chrome, you've got gold. There's a lot of metals at play here. But maybe to speak to the model that you're looking at, it's a little different than a lot of people are used to because it's in Montana, but it really matches what you see in South Africa in the Bushveld complex. And it's very similar, these Platreef deposits, to what Anglo American has or what Ivanhoe has that's coming online there. Maybe just point out what was mined in Africa for people not familiar and why it's so important that you have it here in Montana with rule of law and in a better jurisdiction.
Sure. And that's exactly it. This is Platreef in Montana, and that's why Ivanhoe's chief geologist joined us, Dr. Danny Grobler, as our vice president exploration. The Stillwater Complex, one of the top 5 largest layered magmatic systems in the world, direct parallel to the mighty Bushveld, which is the biggest. And Stillwater is by far the biggest in the Western Hemisphere, which is a key point in this geopolitical age. The thinking that we're applying to Montana, the Platreef reference, is a reference to the 6 billion pounds nickel that Ivanhoe has at Platreef and the 10 billion pounds of nickel that Mahalaquena, that Anglo American has. That's 15 billion pounds of nickel together. That's a staggering wealth, plus copper, plus PGEs. They actually don't have the cobalt over there, which is interesting. We're a little weaker on PGEs, but that is not what America wants us to focus on. They've been clear they want nickel and cobalt, and we already have 1 billion pounds of nickel, 91 million pounds of cobalt, and we're wide open for expansion at that. So the Platreef model is very real, and that's what we're playing here. And we've got the Ivanhoe expertise together with the Glencore funding and interest to drive it. You're absolutely correct that Glencore likes the polymetallic nature of what we're doing. They understand that the biggest mines in the world are often bulk tonnage or mid-grade. These smaller high-grade things that catch the retail's interest and fancy rarely become big mines, and they're often too expensive to operate despite the high grades, the flashy grades of the single intercepts. Glencore has been great to work with, and they've been quite clear that they want us to find big economic nickel deposits that are polymetallic like this.
Well, and just to make the complication in a good way even more interesting, I talked with Danny Grobler at VRIC, if you remember, and I was been in his ear for about 30 minutes. He was blowing my mind, Mike, with some of the drill core you guys were showing off, and he was pointing out that in addition to the Platreef model, the South African model that you were just discussing, there's also these new structures, and originally somebody on your team dubbed them the new animal. You've simplified it to the end structures, but there's some other second event going on here at Crow Mountain. Maybe speak to that, these end structures that you're exploring as a second mineralized event.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, we have an enthusiastic team, but you can't always let them name things. You're absolutely correct that the new animal was shortened to N series. I'm pleased to report there are now 8 N series structures, N1 through N8, and we've now drilled a number of them, and that's part of the upcoming drill results that you'll see here shortly. The first news release is going to focus, however, on holes drilled mostly into the EM anomaly. This was alluded to in a past news release, but this 12-kilometer anomaly, and it tagged a couple of the end structures. The subsequent news release will touch on the broader end structure results. You asked what's interesting about these end structures. They are an overlay addition to that Platreef backdrop. The layered stratigraphy, the Platreef setting, is very real and is still the broader backdrop. At Crow Mountain, we see these deep roots. There's something going on at depth there, and that translates to all this disruption we see at surface and these north-south cutting N-series structural events that are mineralized, and that has been our focus for the past drill program. There are now 8 of them. This is a high-grade addition to that broader Platreef backdrop, if you will. And it probably extends to the west to that high-grade gold, high-grade nickel showing at Pine. There's an early thinking that this may tie into that, and in fact may go east more widely as well. We're just getting going on this. No one has properly modeled, explored the Stillwater Complex ever, right? The lower Stillwater Complex ever. And we're bringing Ivanhoe brains to this, an Ivanhoe level understanding to this.
Well, I think it's also important to mention that with a polymetallic deposit like this, with a lot of the larger base metals companies having looked at core and the core shack and talked to you over the years, that you still own 100% of this project. Yes, Glencore has come in as a key stakeholder and they're interested in the work you're doing, but this hasn't been diluted down over the years where some other big base metal company holds all the project dilution. And we hear about dilution a lot in the marketplace, Mike, mostly on the equity side, but You made a great point to me off mic that, look, we haven't diluted the project at all. So maybe just speak to where you're positioned, that you're not encumbered by the same kind of problems that a lot of other polymetallic projects have as far as the development scenario.
And you could even extend that to the broader junior space. I'm going to say the obvious here. It's what I'm good at. The junior miners don't have income. So it's obvious you're going to dilute somewhere. And the job becomes de-risking an asset, advancing an asset in the smartest way possible. We've been offered project level deals since before we even drilled this project. We've talked to basically all the base metal giants at this point, and project deals are often top of their mind. Historically, they don't do a lot for the junior partner. The market very quickly values you at the end result, say it's 20% ownership, and you sit at 5 and 10 cents in perpetuity, basically, because you've shown that you can identify a good project and hand it off to a bigger party. You haven't done a lot for your shareholders. It's not an easy market for a junior to operate in. We've done a really good job of advancing the asset. And we, as you say, we've been able to keep 100% ownership of the project, no royalties, no streams. Now is the right time to start thinking about bigger possible structures. Maybe not this year, but we have that optionality. We're funded. Glencore's in for 15.4%. That's a good number. We can build this. We can keep advancing this, and we've kept those cards close so we can play them at the right time.
One other element I'll weave in here is that you've been pretty good at using some of the other projects in your portfolio to get some value there to help keep funding things as well. We will get to the recent news here as we wrap up. But before we do that, I think it's also important to point out you got a lot of other projects that hardly anybody even mentions. You don't get any value for them as far as I can tell. And they give you optionality to find other ways to option those projects off to bring in other capital to fund exploration at Stillwater West. So maybe just speak to the overall portfolio of projects you still have in the stable, Mike.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I've been doing this for a long time, which is why we have 5 property interests. 3 of them district scale in really good jurisdictions. Kluane, we're the biggest holder in the Kluane belt. Critical minerals, but earlier stage than Stillwater, Montana. Ontario, big gold interest right next to Treasury Metals. Heritage Mining is doing really good work earning in on that. We get good exposure to the gold space for that, but they get to do the heavy lifting. Worth noting that Frank Gista's group just bought in to Treasury Metals. That ingenious merger, I think, is the term, bringing new interest to that district and to Heritage's work right beside them on our ground. And then Montana, of course, the flagship, and for obvious reasons. We also have a critical minerals project in Alaska, Duke Island, and we have a back-in right on a high-grade past-producing mine in BC, the Yankee Dundee mine.
Well, I just think it's interesting that those projects are hardly ever mentioned, and there's so much of a focus on Stillwater, and rightly so, but they give you some other optionality to find other ways to build value to bring into the company that may continue to plow things forward with the Stillwater West Project. I guess just as we wrap up, Mike, let's look forward to what is some of the key news. You've got drilling to still release from last year, but you also have drilling on tap for this year. Just give us an overall look forward at what to expect for 2024.
Yeah, absolutely. Drill results are top of mind, and I think that'll be 2 tranches. I said this on stage in DC, but it's probably 2 tranches and soon. Updates on other assets, as you alluded to, and the plans for 2024 and beyond, frankly. You will see us continue to expand this and grow this, Stillwater, Montana. And we will also start to wrap some production level thinking around it too, just to give you a teaser there. A bunch of the end users in the U.S. government would like to see a PEA level study, and we will start to think that way as well. This is ready for that now.
All right, so a lot on tap with the drill news from last year, but also drill plans for this year. You've got other projects with potential catalysts, and then you also have the thinking towards a PEA. So a lot on tap for Stillwater Critical Minerals. If people want to follow along with the news, definitely click on the link below this interview. It takes you over to the company website, directly to the news section. Mike, keep us posted as more news breaks. We'll get you back on the show for an update, and looking forward to our next conversation.
Brilliant. Thank you.